And hello, everyone. My name is Jane Carlin, and I'm a member of the board of the Book Club of Washington. And I have the pleasure of introducing this afternoon's speaker, my friend and colleague, Dr. Amanda C. Roth Clark. You have all read her biography, but it is important to reemphasize her stellar academic credentials. Amanda holds both an MLS and a PhD in Library and Information Studies from the University of Alabama. She is currently the Dean of Library and Special Programs at Whitworth University in Spokane, and she is also the chair of the Orbis Cascade Alliance, an organization that supports academic libraries across the Northwest. Her research interests are many, including architecture, artist books, and library administration. And I'm sure many of you on today's call have no doubt read her wonderful article about Tim Ely, a well-known book artist in our state, in the last Book Club of Washington Journal. In addition to her library work and education, she holds degrees in architectural history and is also working towards an MBA. Amanda, I'm tired just reading that biography. Today, we are in for a treat. On this rainy and windy Northwest afternoon, we have the pleasure of visiting China and learning about Amanda's discovery of the May Hopeful, a unique typewritten and hand-rendered codex which tells the story of an adolescent girl's travel to the Far East in the early 20th century. This document, roughly 60 pages in length, sheds light into an otherwise forgotten world of colonialism seen through the eyes of a youthful traveler. Through this rare document, Amanda will help us retrace the narrative journey. Using this example, she will explore complexities of narrative storytelling through book arts. Please join me in a round of virtual applause and welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Amanda Clark.
Oh, thank you, Jane. That was lovely. I really appreciate it. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to share my screen and show you some slides, which should be fun. So hopefully you are seeing my slides right now. That's always the hope. Excellent. Good, good. Let's see. And I want to adjust something. Okay, great. So yes, so today what I'm going to do is actually tell you really a story. It's not a lecture as much as it is a story. And then it's retelling something that my husband Tony and I did together. And Tony's here with us today from Scotland. And so I told him this morning as we were chatting over Zoom that like any good married couple, I'm going to tell the story and then I will have undoubtedly forgotten pieces or he remembered it differently. So then he gets to chime in during the Q&A and adjust any of those parts of the narrative that might need to be forgotten or that were forgotten. So Tony and I have traveled to China many times and done sort of work in tandem while we are there. And one of our trips was in 2011. And we traveled to the coastal city of Tianjin, which was, you may remember, where parts of the 2008 Olympics were held. And one of the things we were doing while we were there, and I asked Tony, I remember many things vividly about this trip, particularly this archive and library that I'm going to tell you about, and the May Hopeful, that book that Jane just mentioned where it came from. But I asked Tony today, why was it that we went here? So you're seeing top left, the XiKai Cathedral in Tianjin that was built by French Lazarists who were there in the 19th century. And I asked Tony, why? I can't remember what we were doing. And he said, well, this archive, this library had been closed since the raid in the 1960s. And you're seeing that on the black and white photo on the right. So that's the front doors of the church you're seeing on the left. This was during the Cultural Revolution when the youth of the country rose up and at the behest of Chairman Mao Zedong attempted to destroy the four olds. These were old traditions and books were often one of the things to be destroyed in these in this time period. It was a very tough time for China. China still, and the people still bear kind of the scars of such a difficult time in the 60s and early 70s. So the archive and library that was attached to this cathedral had its doors closed to protect it in the 1960s. And the Red Guards had gone in and they had grabbed sort of one shelf of books, and it turned out to be a shelf full of Bibles, which as a biblio enthusiast myself, if you're going to burn something out of a rare archive, a Bible is often a heavily reproduced book. So the loss is perhaps not as great as a unique item. So that's a controversial statement, but I'm going to stick with it. So we were at one point relieved that only that one shelf of books had been burned. And you see sort of remnants of burning here in this black and white photograph in the foreground. And so we had gone here, and Tony, my husband, has been a researcher in the Vatican. And so he showed them his Vatican researcher card and said, really, you should let me into this archive and library. You know, we could really assess it for you. My wife is a librarian. And so they said, okay, we will let you in to this archive. It has not been opened since the 1960s. The door's just been locked. And you can come in and we will give you a handler to make sure you're taken care of, but also to make sure we weren't pilfering the goods. So I don't blame them at all. And so we were given a handler who warmed to us over the hours that we were in there and became sort of a rapid friend. And so we were allowed into this place. So I need to pause just for a second because it ties in with the Whitworth Library in some degree. And so I'm going to pause my story, say something about the Whitworth Library at sort of Jane's behest, and then come back to our intriguing narrative of the secret library being open to us. So one thing that happens, I was just talking to Tim about this, is many things sort of come to libraries. Jane probably knows this as well. Things just sort of arrive. People are sort of offloading things or sharing things, or they hear you have particular interests. And one thing that's known about our library here at Whitworth is that I and Tony, my husband, who also teaches here, really have an interest in things Chinese. And I have a real passion for Chinese propaganda from the mid-century. So one thing is that we've accumulated posters. And so this is an example of one of these posters on the right, and I'm highlighting this red book. And let me just toss into the chat, for those who want it for later, a link to our poster collection here. We've digitized our Chinese propaganda posters. We have the physical items, but we've digitized them as well. And so you can, after the fact, you can scroll through and enjoy looking at some of our collection. So this example on the right shows a young Red Guard waving a red book. These would have been the Red Guards who also burned books. And so one of the fun things about the Whitworth collection is that we have, this is, I think, a new donation. This is about a fourth or a fifth of it. And it's full of these red books in a variety of languages. Tony, I think he can chime in later, but I think it's something like 16 or 18 different languages of little red books. And these are, of course, the quotations of Mao Zedong that the Red Guards, this is sort of the one book they were allowed to really embrace during that time period. And so they were loved and coveted, or at least read, and part of ceremonies they were waved. So the Whitworth collection, these are still going in the process of being processed. They're not fully incorporated into the collection yet, but this is sort of the local piece of this more global story. So let me get back to my narrative, if I can make it progress. There we go. So here we are outside of where the archive and library is. It's in this historic building around the corner from the cathedral that you just saw. And so we're just entering this day, kind of an autumn day. It's overcast. The building was from 1914, and we enter into the hallways here in 2011, and they are very of a type that Tony and I are familiar with, having been to China many times since the 1990s. And we're led down these hallways to the library. And there are actually two parts to this library. There was a downstairs portion and an upstairs portion. So this is a photograph I took of the downstairs portion. And of course, you get a sense of the tremendous amount of dust that has accumulated. Books are sort of piled and toppled. You can see over on the left, they're sort of slumping, and you have a case sort of on its back on the floor. So this room was really in terrible disarray. And even before the pandemic, here I am in 2011 wearing a mask because the dust was fierce in these spaces. And there was no light in this room, so we had to bring in our own flashlights to do the work. And the work that we were doing was trying to get a sense of what was held in the library, what was held in the collection. There were kind of myths and rumors that everything was in Latin and these kinds of things, but we actually determined in our work there that a majority of the books were in French. As well as some in Chinese and a variety of other languages. So we took lots of pictures to document what we were seeing and sort of the conditions as they were. And then in the upstairs library space, that's what you're seeing here. Tony set up an impromptu photography station to photograph some of the more intriguing books that were in this space. And so what you're seeing here is with Tony there on the right, you're seeing in the foreground the original card catalog that was, of course, done by hand by the librarian of the time before it was closed in the 1960s. It was all still intact, and it still matched all the books that were on the shelves. So everything was really, it was really a time capsule, and it was such a treasure. So on the bottom left, you can see I just did a rough sketch with the architectural training, right? I did a rough sketch to get a sense of what was there, where it was located on the day that we were able to enter this space. So here are just some more photos of what that room looked like when we went into it. Parts of it were easier to get to than other parts. Some parts were really kind of blocked up, but we had fun skirting around the room. So as Tony's photographing, I'm assessing what's there. And one of the things, as a lover of book arts and artist books, one of the things that jumped out at me is this intriguing little book, and it had a very plain kind of green cover. But I popped it open and I saw it was called The May Hopeful. And immediately I could see that it was hand rendered. And so I was very intrigued because I'm really interested in one of a kind artist books. And this sort of had that energy. So I was really excited. So I started looking through this book. And I've shown this to students here at Whitworth, and sometimes they say, did you pinch it? And, did you steal it? And no, I kind of wish I had, but no, it's still there in China. And so what I quickly assessed is that this was, as Jane said, it's a typed codex. It's now a codex, it's been bound, but these were typed pages that then were rendered by hand. And so I started to pick apart, who was the author, the maker of this book. It talks about the legation quarters. It talks about colonial Peking or Beijing and colonial Shanghai. And we're very near Beijing here in Tianjin. That's where we're located, just a quick bullet train from Beijing. And so what I'm going to do is just show you some of the interiors and then sort of get to the surprise ending of how we sort of sleuthed and did spy work to figure out what this book was all about. So you'll see there, I've grabbed some quotes out of the book that give us a glimpse into early 20th century life in China from the perspective of, as it turns out, young women living there in that colonial context. So you'll find that they talk about the markets and what you could buy in those markets. And so as a historical document, of course, as a librarian, I'm always encouraging our students to think about how books can be used as historical documents. So this book gives us a view into the economy at the time, for example. In this one, they talk about languages and particularly Polish. And so I'm getting a sense of who were these, who was this author or authors of this text? And it seems that we were dealing with people from a variety of countries. And so the little teasers and ticklers. And you'll get a sense here as well, these beautiful illustrated initials on the right that were added to the otherwise somewhat plain typewritten text. The girl who wrote this wrote, afterward, I had hot buttered toast, chocolate with a little ham and eggs and marmalade. If the weather's fine, I sat in the garden and got some fresh air and sunshine. So you get a sense here from this narrative that this was a very well-to-do young person with access to lots of good, rich delicious things. And so again, thinking about the context of the time of China, of the haves and have-nots, it starts to tell an interesting story. Some of the tales in the book are fanciful, others are nonfiction. So it's a real variety of different things that appear throughout the book. And this one, there are also short stories, short works of fiction as well, by the various different authors who, in this case, have done these really tiny illustrations to go along with the text. The whole thing is really quite splendid and fanciful. And I did have a student here at Whitworth transcribe the whole document so that we have a Word document of all of this so that we could do searches, for example, keyword searches, that kind of thing. So that's very helpful. They talk about the Great War, of course, between the Germans and the Allies, and who won, of course, is fresh in their minds. They talk about memories of home and customs and the things that they miss. This one woman wrote about Christmas in Poland, and there was a Polish author involved in this volume, as you've already heard. And so they're remembering that which they've left, or that which they've been removed from by their parents who are now living in China. So there's sort of a moralizing tale, and several of those, and a great little story about the use of a camera and these great little drawings of the camera itself and how that process works. And so again, it's helping us sort of date this text. The story of Joan of Arc is retold or told as the story of Mulan, which is of course the Chinese version of that story. And another Christmas tale, which started to make me wonder if this book was written for Christmas or around Christmas to be given as gifts, perhaps. And near the end of the book, we start to get a real sense of who the authors are. And this is where I got really excited. And I remember I grabbed Tony at one point and said, "You have to help me solve this mystery. I want to understand about who the authors are." And look at this amazing little star in the bottom right. This is a representation of a real building. I bet we can figure it out. So Tony, being the great sleuth and scholar that he is, did know what the building was because he spends a tremendous amount of time in archives, and pulled up this building, St. Joseph's School in Tianjin. So it's in the same city, and this is the entrance. And I have another photo in case you're not convinced if it's the right school, but we have several photos that match the illustration that the girls had put in this star. And here's a quote: "We often hear it said of the girls of St. Joseph's, especially the hope, should be so good as to guide others." So remember, this little book is called The May Hopeful. And so we were trying to untangle what is the May Hopeful, and then the mention of the sixth and also of hope popping up several times. This one, in this story earlier in the book, they talk about how there's no jollier set of girls than the girls at St. Joseph. So we knew it was St. Joseph. So the picture with the name of the building matches the naming of the school in the book. The brightest star in the sphere is the hope. And I did have to do a little bit of scurrying around to figure out what the sixth was, because this is not something familiar to me as an American, but this would be, in the British system anyway, this indicates sort of that 12th year, young women of the age 16 to 18, so at sort of the end of their secondary studies. And so that's exciting. And then there's a poem here in the book where they talk about the praises of the author of May. It's in that third paragraph. And so I'm trying to understand this May Hopeful title of the book. And then at the very end of the book, we actually have a list of the names of the different young women who authored the book. And you can tell by the way the typesetting is here, this has been reproduced, right? Or it's one of these stacks of papers where you would have typed and it would have made multiple copies in one typing. And so I do wonder if each of these young women had a copy that was then maybe given to a family member, but you have their names there. And then by going through the book, you can kind of discern where they were from or what their language was before they went to this boarding school. And just a note about these boarding schools in China, often in legation quarters or quarters of the colonies, right? So you would have sort of the French colony and next to, I'm trying to think of all the different, the pie of China at the time that was sort of divided up by these different colonial empires. It was very common for the families to move from those countries to live within those legation quarters and or those colonial quarters. And then these schools were often boarding schools that the children of those families would go to. They would also often have, those would be boarders in many cases, and then they would often have day students. And in very many cases, these boarding schools included Chinese students as well. So it was not just foreign students, but really a mix. And so in memoirs you read at this time about what it was like to go to these schools, you get a lot of tales of sort of interaction, of cultural interaction, and how the children were really learning about China from their fellow Chinese classmates, often a benefit that their parents didn't have, this sort of leveling of the playing field. So here we have this list of names of these young women from all over the world. And again, thanks to husband Tony, who's going to chime in with some additional details, he was able to find a photograph from this time period of the St. Joseph École, the school in Tianjin. And so you're getting a photograph here of a teacher, one of these nuns. Often these schools were run, especially the girls' schools, would be run by orders of European nuns who were there for the education of young women. And so we have here one of these class photos, the right age group, by the way. So who knows? It could be our May hopeful authors. We'll never know for sure. And here's another photograph of St. Joseph's and that original rendering in the star. And I think what I love so passionately about using this example with students here at Whitworth and elsewhere is it gives really name and face and voice to a whole generation of people who otherwise may be lost to history, right? These young women may have had, as many of us do, unremarkable lives, and we may not really remember them. And so this is an amazing snapshot and time capsule of some lives as they were lived, the stories they had to share. And so you get to really have empathy with a group of young women who you may never otherwise have gotten to spend time with. And so this book is just so remarkable in so many ways, but this is one piece that I love about it and why I love sharing it with students. So this is our May hopeful, that's that front page again, and the school building that existed at the time, of the right name in the right place. And just to loop back to where we started, I wanted to show one of these library cards that we found in this locked library that we got to go into, some of the first people to walk in those doors in decades. And this is the library card for the May Hopeful that we've just been walking through. And so it's in Chinese, and Tony helped me translate some of this, that they only had the one volume in the library. It was from the girls of St. Joseph in Tianjin, and it was written by them and edited by them. And that card was still in place in that catalog, just where it had been left in the 1960s before the doors were locked and the dust began to accumulate. So that is my tale as I wanted to tell it. But I'd love before, and I'm sure some of you have questions or thoughts or musings or ponderings, but before that, I just wanted to hand Tony the proverbial mic and see what was conjured for him as I was rambling on, and any corrections he may wish to offer at this time. Tony from Scotland.
Goodness, wow, that was conjured so many memories. I don't have much to say other than Amanda actually produced a catalog of everything that was in the entire library and archive there that had been actually closed in the 1950s and had sat unopened from the 1950s until 1966, when the Red Guards broke in and removed, of course, as she mentioned, the first layer of books, which were Bibles, and burned them in front of the cathedral. So what was behind that then again was relocked, and there was a great deal of mythology among scholars all over the world. That no one had been in that library for decades, several decades. And when we went in, and it had virtually been untouched since the 1950s, and that one afternoon in 1966. And this book, Amanda really identified this May Hopeful as something that was quite remarkable. And what's also curious about that is if you've heard of Adolescent Ma, she's a New York Times bestseller writer. She published a book called Falling Leaves, and that book is about her life at St. Joseph's in Tianjin, just a few years after the May Hopeful was produced. So it's just quite exhilarating actually to find something like this. And I think too, for me in any case, I was looking at a lot of the other historical works and the archival documents, but this was a hand-colored book by these young women with exciting personal stories that one rarely gets to see. And I have to say too, that this is the last thing I'll say about it, it's an incredibly beautiful book, just tenderly compiled with extremely moving stories about their life in Tianjin. And of course, these are girls, French and Polish and American and British, who were studying in classes along with Chinese and Japanese girls. So it was a kind of an expat community. And this book really does provide a remarkable glimpse into the lives of these young women in the 1930s, at a time when, just historically speaking, Japan was occupying China, it was bombing Shanghai. This was an incredibly tense and fearful time. And here these young women are recording just things like, the food that they like, and the camera that they were using, and Christmas gatherings. So I'll just stop there and just say, Amanda, great job. That was exciting.
Well, it was exciting. It was thrilling. The whole experience was pretty exciting. Well, I would be happy to take questions. I definitely see one in the chat about what the media is here, whether it's watercolor or ink or colored pencil, and if there was a sense that there was more than one artist. So the last question I do feel confident on. I think so each of the essays in the book was authored very clearly by different young women, and so I've always suspected that they did the artistry for their own chapters. I feel very confident about this because the styles are different. The flavor of the art is different, and I think it's very for this one, for example, about the telling of the story of her uncle's camera. I very much suspect, that this is a little self-portrait that she's done here. And so, yes, I think each of them was probably rendered by the author, but that's just as an art historian, just my own suspicion. I could be wrong. And then as for the media, I don't know. And it's been now so long since 2011. I can't remember the tactile feeling, that the colored pencil would really create, almost like sort of emboss the paper as from pushing on it, whereas a watercolor would not. But I also remember flipping through these pages, and there's not a lot of bleed through, and the pages are incredibly thin. This is like super crispy, very thin paper that would have been used to type on. And so I would lean some sort of colored pencil, but probably not watercolor. But again, I'm making sort of a informed guess on that.
Amanda, this is Jane, and you're getting a lot of questions in the chat, and I'll just add to them now, because I think many people are probably wondering, where is the book now? And what is the status of the library? And then perhaps you can turn back to the chat questions.
Yeah, I think, I don't know okay, Jane, you may have to remind me, there was like multiple questions there, but oh shoot.
Where is the book now? And
Oh, yes.
what's the status of the library?
Okay. So the book we left there, we didn't take anything but photographs. And we giggled about some of the photographs because it looked like there was a ghost in some of them. So we had a good chuckle about that later. But we took hundreds of photographs that day. We left everything there, and I don't know what happened to it. And this is just a kind of, and was a kind of a crisis of conscience, because I was thinking, this is very special to me. This kind of object, to the uninformed eye, may not seem special. It may seem, kitschy even. So I had definitely a crisis of conscience there. But, do you save it for the world or do you save it for the moment? It's a tough one. I always have my students wrestle with these kinds of questions in class. But, and I teach art history classes. So I'm a library director, but I get to teach art history. The other part of your question, Jane, is Tony and I, we were sort of there for a 3-day stretch doing this work. And one of the things we started to realize is that those who are in charge currently were very interested in sort of getting a sense of what the collection was worth. There was a real monetary focus. And so Tony and I started to think, okay, we're playing a very delicate, the dance is delicate, because if we tell them it's worth too much, there might be a desire to just sell it on the open market. If we don't tell them it's worth anything, there won't be a respect for the collection. So we had to we took a few books in particular and did some kind of quick, work on the internet to see if those books were already on the market being sold, or a book similar, or another sort of edition, not of the May Hopeful, obviously, but of the other books that were in the library. And then we came back with a few examples saying, some of your books are quite valuable and some of them are not. But the whole collection in its totality is unique and valuable for being sort of untouched, right? And so, Tony, do you have a follow-up on that question? Because you've actually looped back with them a few times.
Right. So first, we took thousands of photographs. And the reason we did that is because several of the books were unique in the sense that in my own research, I couldn't find copies in any collection, any place. So the May Hopeful, of course, was unique in as much as it was. I can't imagine any place else one could find them. So what we did then is, once we figured out how unique this whole collection was, we photographed in several books the whole thing. And in many cases, these digital collections are the only record, even that scholars know of that particular book. So the state of the collection and archive today is an absolute mystery. As far as we're told, it was relocked. It remains locked after that 3-day visit, and it probably, if the information that we have is true, then it just has extra layers of dust. So, and partially the reason that it's remaining locked is because of fear that the state will seize the collection. So they've just locked it again, and it's in the building actually is quite old. So, and that was in 2011. So that was not yesterday. So let me just end by saying I personally have a great deal of anxiety, but I have to exercise a kind of Buddhist detachment from it. So we don't really know.
Yeah, go ahead, Jane.
No, it's just extraordinary to think that you had access, and how you must have felt that, walking through there with your flashlights and making these discoveries. It's just so exciting, and something that everybody that loves books can relate to.
Yeah, and it's something that that we're really passionate about, sort of as a couple. So this is not the only time we've engaged in this type of work, where, and this is something Tony and I really enjoy doing. This kind of gets to one of the questions in the chat. So Tony is, this is his area of specialty. So he's a historian of China, particularly 19th century, and loves the language. And I can go shopping in the language, but that's kind of the extent of my linguistic abilities. So, but together we have traveled extensively and we go places that people often don't go. And we have conversations and we have coffee and we sort of share our passion for stuff. And, you know, the passion is very universal, right? Like you go all over the world and people get excited when you're excited about things they're excited about. So we've had some incredible experiences getting into kind of unusual places and seeing interesting things. We have always tried to document with photographs. These photographs, as you can see, are not exceptional, right? There was dim lighting, fluorescent lighting. It was not ideal photography conditions. But as Tony says, in some cases, who knows where these objects are? These may be the only photographs. And so one of the things I do as a library director is I try to get as much as I can, you know, that is ethically sort of appropriate to share. I like to share things digitally. And so if you poke around on that link I put in the chat, you'll find that there are many interesting things that we have digital copies of. Generally, I try only to post digital copies of things that we physically own. That's sort of best practice. But there are times with documents like this. Right now, these images live in PowerPoints. They live on flash drives. They don't necessarily live on the internet. And one of the interesting things, as Tony and I have done this kind of work together, is how often we're approached by Chinese nationals who have requested to sort of have their own history repatriated, right? They would like to have photographs of things that now live outside of China that are of China, because those photographs don't exist in China in some cases. And so it's a really interesting, you know, in America, we're very focused on copyright law, and not all the world plays by the same rules when it comes to copyright law. And so it's a really interesting exercise in sort of this delicate dance of the access of information to people, right? And so I sort of lean a little. Among my peers, I'm considered sometimes a bit cavalier, but it's really, I think it's because of my travels. I really want to give back as much as I can. So there's a question in the chat about the binding of the book, and you can see this tiny picture in the bottom left. It's a sort of a thin tape binding down the edge. But it was hardy. It did not fall apart as I photographed it. So yay for that. All kinds of glues and such things. As we know from working in libraries, glue tends to fall apart, but not the way that tape does. So bindings and adhesives are always sort of great concern. When we were doing photographs, we tried to cradle books as best as possible, but also to reduce glare. And of course, you see on that cover down below, terrible glare, and on a beautiful matting of Chinese newspaper. So again, not the ideal conditions, but the book did hold together. So yay for that. I also see, I think I kind of answered this question about the research and why we were doing it. Tony was working on one of his many books, which was taking us around all kinds of archives. But this was the only time we got to go somewhere where I got to kind of index and assess the collection, which was a wonderful experience. And there is an Excel document where we have a breakdown of how many volumes, what languages they were written in. I think we even dug into binding types, because some things were bound in a traditional Chinese style, other books were bound in the West and brought into China. And the year on the book, Tony, I'm recalling that it was 1930s, that our final assessment was that it was made in the 1930s, partially because of the reference to the Great War, the camera, and then our knowledge of St. Joseph as a school. Is that your recollection, Tony?
I'm guessing around 1935 to 38, probably around then.
But the date does not appear anywhere in the book.
No, but the names, actually, there's an archive in Rome where the photos came from that has those records. So if anyone's really ambitious to know everything about this book, you could probably go to Rome and consult the archive and date precisely when the book was produced.
Amanda, this is Jane again, and I have another type of question. You mentioned that you share this with students, and I know that not only do you teach art history, but the history of artist books, and you're also a collector like I am. So when you show this with students, have they been prompted to create their own personal narratives or their own journals? And how does that relate to your own teaching?
Yeah, I love to encourage. So I do teach a book arts class, and that's actually coming up this January. So it's an intensive class every day, 3 hours in the afternoon, where we go through a kind of history of artist books with a splash of art history as sort of a lens through which to look. And then we have a workshop component as well. So this year, I think I've hooked Tim Ely to do some work with us, as well as James Allen from Portland may Zoom in for the class, and anyone and everyone. I think I just spoke with Vamp and Tramp about doing a virtual trunk show. In the past, they've come to the class and they've brought the physical trunk show where they bring out their artist books, and we get to handle the books. And I often like to take a small, tiny amount of my library budget and offer the students the opportunity to vote on their favorite artist books, usually a ranking of like 3, because price, we just can't afford. Artist books can be, $3,000-$5,000. That I don't have that kind of budget. I wish I did. Someone endow a budget for me, please, so that I can do that. We usually have a few $100s. And so I asked the students to write up a short explanation of, after they've handled the book and spent time with it in a sort of leisurely manner, which of the books really do they feel connected to and why? So some sort of reasoning behind the book. And then I try to buy a few copies. And this is such a beautiful exercise on so many levels. It supports the industry, of course, which I love, but also it really gives the student a sense of ownership in book collecting in a way that most young people, 18 years old, 19 years old, haven't really entered a world of book collecting before. It's not really been in their consciousness in many cases. And so it gives them that joy, as many of us on this call know, of what it feels like to sort of book hunt and lay claim to incredible books that may otherwise not be valued. And so they have a real sense of ownership, but also I love reading their essays about what touches them in their own personal lives. And this is what's so great about book arts and artist books, is how incredibly intimate they are as a type of art. And so I do also, Jane, often extend to them that they can make a book, even though they may not be artists, right? They may not claim that title or craftsmen, but I encourage them to make a book if they feel so inclined. And so I've had a few incredible works that I wish I had, but they kept them. One of which was one of my students had a sister who had been left at the altar, literally like a dramatic, the groom failed to show up to the wedding. And she still had the engagement ring in the little box that it came in. And she asked her sister if she could have this ring to make an artist book. And so she did this beautiful job of writing that story on a simple folded piece of paper. And so when you open the box and you grab the ring, you pulled out this accordion folded piece of paper that told the story of being left at the altar, which I thought was incredibly powerful and beautiful and very tender and very personal to this family. So I love this opportunity. Another student wrote a passionate narrative about feelings of patriotism or lack thereof on an American flag. And that, of course, was a difficult work for the class. And this is art history, right? Whenever you engage something difficult, you spend time with it. So we spend a lot of time talking about the controversy of defacing an American flag, and oh my goodness, the work gets really hard for a professor in those situations. But the students are learning and growing and interrogating hard questions. So that is excellent. I see a couple more questions in the chat.
Yes, you've got a few more in the chat. I think a couple questions, and we want to make sure we get to all those.
Yes, and I'm mindful of time. I won't hold you all hostage. Next, China trip. Oh my goodness. So yes, book art and history. So Tony and I sadly had an incredible trip to China scheduled for March of 2020. And we were so looking forward to it. And of course, that was canceled. And we don't yet have plans to return, but I always tell people, even though I'm going to Scotland next week to meet Tony there, and I'm very excited about going to Scotland, the country I really want to get back to is China. I cannot wait to get back to China. And so, yes, I hope we can do some fun things while we're there. We have had the opportunity in the past to go to book arts shows in China, the Diamond Leaves exhibit we attended there when it was displayed at CAFA in Beijing. So yes, book art is often woven into our travels in China, and I expect next time we're there, I hope it is as well. So that's a field that's taking off, and particularly the kind of the sub-genre of zines, because zines are these little, what is it, the old saying, all you need is a photocopier and a pen and a stapler, and you can make a zine. They tend to be great methods of distributing information. And so in a country where information is often filtered and siphoned, the popularity of zines among young people is just huge, because they can get their thoughts out to their friends and to those who don't know them quickly and easily, and kind of stay under the radar. So I'm really interested next time I'm there in sort of delving more into the zine culture that's really burgeoning in China right now. It's really exciting times in China for artists. So class project, a teacher had the class to do, okay, I'm reading the chat question. Yeah, I do, Tim, I do wonder if this was a class project. It sort of smacks of a class project. And the reason I say that is, and sort of like an annual or something, the way that some of the content is there's so much care in the essay and the way it's written and the way it's rendered, and others, much less so. So it's just like a class where you have some students who are so passionate about the subject, and then others who are just like, I just want to get this done, so it does have a bit of that feeling to it. But at the same time, having looked through this very carefully and lovingly, there was a real sense of pride in the work, right? This was definitely, this is something I could just see a young person giving as a gift to a parent, because it really had that the pride of the object, right? There was great care in the whole thing. It's something really striking about it, something very tender. Does the state of China know about the collection? Yeah, and then that discussion of danger with the state. So here we are treading into sort of dangerous waters. Tony, do you want to take a stab at this question about the collection and whether or not it's at risk? Does it contain like controversial, are the books dangerous? There's always been this. So Tony and I have spent time, I'm going to let you answer, but Tony and I have spent time in the state-run libraries, which are large and well-used. And then we've also spent time in private libraries. Tony, I'm thinking of TBC, where you have to show a foreign passport to even access the library, because it's so full of controversial material. And that's in Beijing, but it's not available to many locals. There are ways to get in, but you sort of have to be vetted, because what's housed in the library is considered so dangerous, because the literature is all from outside. People literally bring these books in their suitcases and donate them to this private library. So you can imagine, kind of amazing such things exist. But yeah, Tony, go ahead.
Right. So, am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I should say that by and large in mainland China, there's really nothing that the government doesn't know. So sure, they know about the collection. It's at one of the most popular tourist locations in the entire city of Tianjin. It's overwhelmed with tourists, and it's right next to this really famous French built building, and so they absolutely know about it. And I think that they're it's on the radar, but it's locked. So I think at this point, the government just doesn't really care about the collection. I suppose if the books were accessible to people, then there's no doubt that the state would intervene. But as a locked collection, the state seems to have just left it alone. But the destiny of most collections like this, once that they become too popular, or once that the owners of the collection open them up typically the state will just take it all and put it in their own archives. So, but then I have to say this about China. In 1966, they were destroying books. At this point, the whole ideal of repatriation is so intense that largely they don't let things be accessible. So when the state seizes these collections, they're completely locked, but they're incredibly well cared for. They're well cared for, but they're not accessible. So that would be sort of my thoughts about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true. Those main libraries in Beijing are some of the world's largest libraries, and they are full of books that you cannot access, which is for scholars incredibly stressful and frustrating. So it's a really interesting question of what will happen in the future to those libraries. Will they be open at some point? We don't know, right? It's a mystery. So Tony makes a good point. Things are not being burned; they're being collected and repatriated. So it's a really interesting time. Yeah, really interesting.
Well, Amanda, we're almost at 3:00, and I just want to thank you. I know this sounds super corny, but I think you'll appreciate it. You have definitely brought some sunshine into our gray and dreary afternoon. And Tony, it was very exciting to see you. I just checked to make sure, it's about 11:00 in Edinburgh. So that was a treat to see you. And Amanda, outstanding. Can't wait to talk to you some more about artist books and classes. And so good to see everybody join us this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.